Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being here. I want to thank you for coming. And for those of you that don't know me, my name is Maribel Weiss. I'm the owner of Antique Resources. And tonight I have the pleasure of introducing a truly talented artist whose works are going to be an exhibit for the entire month of August. That brilliant artist is Drew Munao. Andrew is an accomplished miniaturist with permanent museum exhibits at the British Titanic Historical Museum, yes, and locally at the Glesner House and the Chicago History Museum. Now, we all have had experience observing miniatures, but there's a couple of things that make Andrew's miniatures truly special. One is that he crafts them out of the materials that you would craft the real life versions. So if the table is wooden, he makes it out of wood. If it's a mirror, he cuts mirrored glass. And what's also special about his miniatures is that they're historical timepieces. So he does a lot of research into specific time periods and the items of that era. Unlike a photograph, what Andrew attempts to do is to submerge you into the experience. So tonight, we are all going to be submerged into the Titanic. Obviously,
Just not at 2:28.
that is why I'm dressed the way I'm dressed. So I anticipate we're going to survive, of course, and we're going to enjoy Andrew's presentation. So please give me a warm welcome for Drew Munao.
Thank you. All right, thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming out. I really appreciate it. This is something I normally do every couple years in Ireland. I've also done a few other lectures in the Chicagoland area, but this is my first teaming up with a business like Antique Resources, and I'm really, really happy that I've made that connection. If you aren't familiar with the store itself, it is some of the most top-line museum quality pieces that you can find anywhere in the country. I highly recommend checking them out online, coming into the store, anything you can do to see some truly quality things. Today's lecture will be mostly centered around Titanic. As she mentioned, I make 112 miniatures of them, but you will also see a few of my other pieces as well in the lecture, as I do different 112 miniatures for various museums of various styles and time periods. All right, that's a picture of me when I had a soul patch. So I began my journey as an actor in Los Angeles, doing film and television. This was after a 3-year stint in Manhattan where I did some off-Broadway. To age myself, what made me leave was the financial crisis of 2008. Then I worked in film and TV, like I said, for several years, eventually giving it up because it was just a very strenuous work environment for me. And I started working for corporate Nickelodeon. And then a few years after that, I mean, I loved my job. It was amazing. But I was like, I miss the artistic side of things. So I decided to kind of give a shot at something I'd always had a passion at, which was miniatures. And then I also have a real passion for history and restoration of antiques. So I thought, well, why not try to make a room that I love? So I initially started with the reading and writing room on the Titanic. And that was the piece that was sold to the British Titanic Society's museum in Southampton. And yeah, it's really history after that. I just kept going and sold more pieces to museums. Again, a huge client of mine is the Titanic. So a good portion of my expertise and knowledge is on the RMS Titanic and the Olympic class for White Star Line. Real quick, most people ask me, like, what scale is it and what is scale? Because you always see there's various sizes of things. You have 112, which is the scale my things are in. This is often referred to as dollhouse scale. You have 1/6 scale, which is significantly larger, and that's made for Barbie scale is what we call it. It's essentially that size of a doll. You have 124, which is going to be your like play set like sizes, and then you have 143, which is getting into your Hot Wheel size or small little train kind of village. All right, introducing you to a few pieces that I've done prior. This is the piece that's in Glessner House, and this is called Unpapered Bedroom, and this centers around a murder that happened in 1930. The piece itself was originally made by Frances Lee Glessner in 1946 for a string of miniatures she did called the Nutshell Studies. And these are still in use today. They are not in public view as they're stored in the Harvard Medical School, but they're still taught for forensic science. Frances Lee Glessner was the mother and birth of forensic science, teaching police officers and detectives that there was so much more to look at in a crime scene that could help assist with the crime. So this was an actual murder, an actual crime scene, and this was the shot-for-shot version of her piece that she had made. And now this is on permanent display at the Glessner Museum here. And that's a few pictures of seeing the crafting of it. My dad actually welded the bed for me. You see all the little pieces, but everything mattered in her art, and it was very interesting because it would often have a red herring of what the crime was. But for example, over here you can see there's two different types of matchbooks. There's two different types of cigarettes. Even though she's a single person in the room, it would tell the detective that there was multiple people in the hotel room with her. This is another piece of mine called the Emerald Room. This is a music room between 1780 and 1820. You'll notice that most of the furnishings in this room are Federal and Chippendale style, as well as a few Louis Quinze. Little fun fact here is the painting. You'll see almost always find Titanic little pieces in mine, but here, this was the sea deck landing painting on Titanic. That's not a Titanic piece, that's another piece. But then you see various stages of building. This book's actually on that table, you can view later. Okay, this is another piece. You see its final stage here, all the way to the right, but it's now and then. It was a piece I had made to represent the passing of time. It is a Georgian sitting room. And yeah, this was a passion piece of my own, actually, that I made. This wasn't a commissioned piece, so this stays permanently at my house. This was a building I made for a private commission of the Robert Taylor Green homes. He had originally grown up in these areas, but now was living elsewhere and wanted a reminder of his childhood home. These were all torn down sometime, I believe, in the late 70s. But yeah, I even had to make him these little lights inside the elevator shafts, and he had a little tunnel that went through, but it was really interesting to meet with him, discuss his memories, because there's no real good photographic evidence of those buildings. Since they were public housing, there wasn't a lot of public record. So I had to, that's really like one of the only photos you have. So I had to go a lot by his memory and his own family's personal photos. All right, now venturing on to Titanic. So Titanic got her start in Belfast, Ireland. And here it was at Harland and Wolff that the blueprints were made in the drawing room, which is now the Titanic Hotel. At Harland and Wolff, Titanic would be built on the dry dock first and then fitted out in the same area, adding her finishings and moldings and trim at another dry dock on the same property. From Belfast, she would then travel to Southampton, where she would pick up a majority of her passengers before departing Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland, two different ports of call, which most people don't know she made, making her final departure at 1:30 p.m. on April 11th, 1912. Here you have a few photos of Harland and Wolff, and this was actually where they did all the making of the fittings in the ship. So you have the millworking shop and you have the upholstery shop. You have the showroom, as well as the canvas and tapestries area. But they had hand craftsmen making all of the various decorations, furnishings, and furniture for the different steamships that they had run. Here you have a few of the advertisements for Titanic's pieces. Her hardware here on the right with North Burton Company. And then most of the mattresses that were made in-house with Harland and Wolff. However, First Class Suites got specialty treatment. They got these nice fancy mattresses up here from Marshall Sanitary Company, which were much more luxurious than even the standard suites would get. And that would be one of those suites like B64 over there. Speaking of B64, we have her right here. So there you have the actual stateroom on the left. You have mine on the right. This was located off of the main aft grand staircase. Oddly enough, in the wreckage, the room is still in existence. They haven't made any cameras or attempts to go in it, but it does still exist in the wreckage. The main design theme of this room was High Empire, also sometimes referred to as Napoleon III. And these pulled on design styles and motifs from the Greeks and the Egyptian civilizations. Interestingly enough, this also resembles Adam's style. Both developed around the 18th century. However, the difference is in the heavy use of the decorative flourishes and the symmetrical paneling. Adam's style is more focused on delicate touches with highlighting the clean lines and symmetry, whereas Empire more heavily gilds things with the grandeur and more imperial look of a room. But both will use the same motif elements such as darting, swags, urns, festoons, medallions, griffins, katydids, and gold leafing pillars. All those good Greek and Egyptian symbols. The furnishings for the first class were made by Mutter and Zune. And those were delivered on March and February of 1912, just right before her sailing. They also had a bunch of specialized doors that were delivered, and one of them was this door for B64. Interestingly enough, the Titanic exhibit that came through Old Orchard here in Chicago had the doors example from B64 on her sister Olympic, as they were both twin ships and had identical decorations. So funnily enough, there's only 2 physical ones examples in existence. That big one, my little one, and then the other one's on the bottom of the ocean. So only 3 have been made. But the first class superior suites got specialized decoration, specialized hardware, specialized mattresses, and specialized furnishings. Another fun fact, nothing was wasted on Titanic. If you look at various photos, various staterooms, and the public rooms as well, you will notice that they repeated a lot of fabrics. So you'll see this was the standard fabric in the room, but it was also in the first class lounge on the pillows. So they repeated it in different areas, utilizing all the materials they had in Harland and Wolff. All right, here you have me, the crafting of the ceiling work over on B64. Interesting fact is in the beam work, they would often shove flannel shirting into the cracks so that during the sailing, when the ship would move, you wouldn't constantly hear the moaning and cracking of the different joints busting together. So they would actually shove little bits of clothing in between each one of the joineries. Another fun fact of that is on the grand staircase, they would have lights also inlaid into the molding so that it would hide that it would be illuminated. But that's why it always looks so light. Here you have the making of the beds and the quilting, which I did out of silk damask on my sewing machine. You'll see in the upper left, a lot of people often ask how they kept the furnishings in situ. And that is one example of how they did it. Most of the chairs, desks, dressers, bedstands were all bolted into the floor. I'll use my little pointer. All bolted into the floor. And then you can even see a little bit of wood still left over from that chair leg that was sitting in there. But that's why when they go down in the wreckage, most of the furnishings are actually still sitting there and look as if it's in that room because they're actually still bolted into those floors. So funny fact about the James Cameron movie, when you see that portion of the film where the ship is splitting in half and all the furniture is flying to like different sides of the room, you would have some of that, obviously, but dressers, all that, that would not be moving, yeah. All right, there's that example I was talking about in Old Orchard here. That's from the Olympic. And then you have the entryway door there, which I had based off of the other various entryway doors of the Empire rooms. There was only one Empire room that had a canopied bed, and that was B64. But we don't have any photographic evidence of their entryways. Except for another stateroom on the ship. So I based my doorway off of research from that other Empire room. You'll see on the left here, if you're tall enough, you'll be able to see it still. But there's a peekaboo on the top of the unit, and it is glass viewed, and you can see inside the closet space of the room as well. All right. Just making some of the furnishings. You'll have the photograph of mine along with the original. Another fun fact about these suites on B deck is they were all made with square windows versus the portholes that you usually see in rooms. And this was to give the passengers the illusion that they were staying in an estate or a mansion rather than having to travel overseas in a steamship. These little baskets that they had here on the left, that was for your various trinkets, glasses, perhaps a prayer book. You'll see actually the furnishings and the fabrics were quite contemporary for the time. This was now the Edwardian age in 1912. But we have to remember that this came from England and Europe, where they were much more fashion forward. So they would have already been entering the Art Deco era. And so you will see various fabrics expressing that on the ship. And I find that very interesting, considering that in America, it really still hadn't, these fabrics, these styles hadn't reached us yet. Okay, you have some more research examples here, renderings of the Prometheus heater. Those were specialized for those specialized first-class rooms. They would have been more basic in the other ones without the decorative elements. These were heated by coils that then would rev up and heat up the entire room. You could put your stockings on the bars as well as your shoes on the under racks below. If anyone's been on a cruise ship, it does get quite wet and can get quite misty, and those would dry them out. They would also have these private cut glass windows that would go up and down, and this was for privacy because there would be promenade decks still outside those windows that passengers would be walking by. And then beyond that was even more privacy of a Jalowski screen, which is this right here, which if you're unfamiliar is little slats of wood. You've probably seen them in various bits of furniture and stuff, and they slide up and they slide down, bits of wood crumpling into each other. And they were all fitted with those as well. So quite a bit of privacy on the ships. Here's another example of the room. These rooms were made with cut glass ceiling lighting instead of the beaded chandeliers that you often see on the ship. Sad tragedy of that is that during the sinking, as well as the light fixtures that were in the reception room, pretty much all shattered, exploded as soon as the water touched them. They had been on all day. That cut glass gets extremely hot the second that seawater touched them. They quite literally exploded. Okay, now you have A21, which is actually located over there. And A21 was obviously located on A deck. And this was considered the your typical first class room. So if you were not staying in the superior suites, you would be staying in a room like this. This room was stayed in by John Bertram Brady, A21. He actually perished in the sinking, and his body was never recovered. But he paid around, in today's money, about $4,231 for that room right there. Yeah. So, and that was considered really, really nice. This room was in a Harland and Wolff standard style, but I think it carries a lot of Adams and Georgian elements, especially in the white paneling, the symmetry, the simplicity. You have an Axminster carpet, which actually they have, you'll see in the next slide, they found, there's Bertram Brady. But that carpeting was from C deck, and A, B, and C, the standard suites were all decorated in typical carpeting, typical bed skirting, etc. So we can pretty much deduce that that was the same carpeting as well as photographic evidence. And then we know from blueprints that that room was staged in blue, in like a royal blue. Some more renderings before I would build the furniture that you would see in the room. That's a piece off of Olympic that was salvaged. You have the making of the bed. On the upper left, you'll see the bed frame in the wreckage, as well as the plug right behind it, which would have had a gimbal lamp plugged into it, which if you're not familiar with what a gimbal lamp is, they're quite unique lamp that would hook into the wall that you could either take off and move around, or you could dip it and it would have a weighted end. Here you have other research along with the final product and the example. These were in almost every room. They were luggage racks that would hinge down with a brass flap. And then you have the standard wardrobes. Here we have an example of the vanity set as well as its view from the wreckage. Fun little story here, this in the lower right-hand corner, this carafe you see with the glass. James Cameron found when he was doing his research for the Titanic film. But what that tells us on a researcher's side is a much cooler story, as the glasses in the rooms would have been sat upside down and they would have been on the different shelf than the carafe. It tells us that someone took that off, used it, placed it on the shelf, and then due to the area that room was in, filled with water gradually enough that it sat in situ, and then the pressure and the physics of it going down kept it in its place, and now it sits forever exactly where somebody last placed it on the night of the sinking. Yeah. Okay, you have some more examples of when I was making the paneling for the room. There's the Axminster carpeting example I was talking about. That's an actual example from the Titanic. So that was pulled off the ship by a trimmer, and he had had a little extra and asked them if he could take it home to his wife as a gift. And they said yes, and it is now the only example we have of carpeting on the Titanic. Yeah. So the sofa berths in the room were very interesting as well. They could double into another bed. Contrary to what you would think common sense would be just to sleep on the actual sofa part, it actually had a quite difficult contraption where the back would fold up and you could pull out another bed and you would sleep on that. So I don't know, seems odd, but that's the way they worked. In the middle you have, that's me molding that trinket dish. You have the starting of the process of the ceiling medallions, which were all standard in third class, as well as various second class and first class areas. They all came from Harland and Wolff. You can still see many, many examples of them in the wreckage, including in the stern section. The third class common room had them all along their ceiling, and when the ship was going down, it peeled back like a can, the whole ceiling, and flipped on its back. So when you view it from the wreckage, you can actually see the line of lights from the ceiling to this day. You have a final comparison shot here of my room and the real A21. It was considered, again, very luxurious from the passengers. Lady Duff Gordon, the inventor of ladies' lingerie, was staying in one of these, as well as Edith Rosenberg, two famous passengers from Titanic, both very wealthy women, and both thought it was lovely. In fact, Lady Duff Gordon commented about how much she adored the valance, or the bed skirt to the bed. The hideous ceiling fans were there. Yeah, unfortunately, that was the only way to bring some cooling comfort into the ships. They could be brought to various areas of the room and hung up. They were in every single room and public room on the ship. They're seen all over the wreckage. It wouldn't be until the late 30s that steamships would start building ventilation systems within the ship that would pull from outside air and blow it inside. It's a fun deposit check from Hershey. He was actually supposed to sail on the Titanic, and he was going to stay in one of their superior suites, and that is his deposit check. He obviously did not wind up on the ship. He wound up canceling, but the Hershey Museum still has his check that was sent. Okay, now the Marconi suites, which you'll see right here behind me. This was a room on the ship that was for sending messages to and from various parts of land. The Marconi officers would spend the majority of their time in these three rooms the whole entire trip. They were sort of a unique position in that they were to never really leave, but they were also considered higher ranking officers on the ship. They were not considered a low rank. So their rooms, their bedrooms themselves, you'll notice in the settee that's in there is the same fabric that's in A21. Because they were expected to be decorated in a first-class standard room. And pictured here, sorry, didn't mention that, is Guillermo Marconi, and that's who invented the Marconi system. This is a top view of the wreckage of the bow, and that's the radio room right there. You would think that might be one skylight, but that's actually two. So the wall would have gone straight down there, and then that would have been the bedroom, and that would have been the receiving room. And that was unique to Titanic because it didn't go to the end of the bulkhead like Olympics did, where they were able to have windows. So it was located midship, so they had to still get daylight in there. So they built a skylight, but they didn't want to build multiple skylights. So they built a single skylight that could go over two rooms. You have various renderings and blueprints when I was making the unit. On the lower right, what they floored the entire ships with was called lino tiles. And this was a unique composite of cork and plastic that was then pressed into shapes, and they were fit into each other like little puzzle pieces. All right, and then we have some making of the furniture in the room. You'll see how I carved the legs. This is usually done with little knives, hot needles, You'll see the varnishing of the settee here. Most of the wood was French polished on the ships, and that is different than what you see standard because French polish is a slow process where you slowly massage in the color into the wood until over time you get the varnished look, whereas we typically now add a color and then add a lacquer on top of that, and then it's done. Some more examples. Researching the drawer pulls. That's a direct fabric example, which I then had reproduced. And that was in a velvet. That's a door on the left-hand side there from the Marconi room. Fun fact about those areas is that the hardware, which was a lot of brass work, and the push plates, which were made of a mahogany, but it was a very toxic mixture of chemicals, caused it to be very resistant to bacteria and any other decaying agents down in the ocean. So with no oxygen and no bacteria to eat them, they're almost perfectly preserved in the ship today. You'll see some more elements of the room. That's a real picture from the ship. That's a rendering from Honor and Glory, Titanic research site. And that's some stitching of the quilt I did. Now the actual receiving room itself, you had two clocks in the room. One showed the UK time, and one showed where they were headed, their destination time. And that way they could always keep track. It was quite confusing. As you traveled across the sea, time kept changing, as well as time zones. And if you had, whether they were in agreement with jumping up the hour or jumping back the hour. And so they had to deal with all that organization. These were mortise locked desks measuring 6 feet 2 inches by 6 feet, made of solid mahogany. They were special made for the room by Harland and Wolff. Mahogany was chosen for a lot of the woods on the ship for its extreme toughness and its inability to dent. And this was done on all the trim as well. You have a few of the machinery here examples, just showing the various research I did into making them. I'm not going to read all the boring machinery I usually go through. We got radio transmitters, multiple tuners, spark coils. And I'm actually psychotic enough and detailed enough that I've gone through these things and wired them as they're supposed to be wired. So Titanic folk appreciate that. Here's an example of an overlay. This is my room. And that's overlaid with the only photographed evidence we have of the Marconi room. That's Harold Bride's head that you see. And this photograph was taken by Father Brown, who got off the ship in Queenstown. So he was on the ship, and then he got off the ship in Queenstown before they left for the last time. And he gives us the only photographs we have of the actual ship itself. And it's what he took during his couple days stay. Funny story about Father Brown, though. He was traveling to meet his uncle, who was the cardinal. And he had made friends with all the first-class passengers he met. And they liked him so much, they offered to pay his full journey to America and then back if they would just stay with them. So he wrote his uncle and asked him if that would be permissive. And he got a single telegraph back in the Marconi room, and all it said was, "Get off the ship." And so he did. He got off in Queenstown, and he survived. Yeah. All right, that's another example, just another photograph in the room. You have the charts there. That's all the various areas they had to remember. This was called the silent room, which is ironic because it was anything but silent. The room had 1 foot thick inch walls due to how much noise it made. In particular, the turbine engine and the spark coil over there in the back were particularly loud. This room would hold voltages of up to 440 volts. The AC-DC converter on the left, I know this is a lot of confusing language for most people, but it's a lot of electricity flowing through this room. And a lot of it was more dangerous than we have today. When you have direct current, you have electricity that you are actually directly dealing with. So it's an interesting thing to think about. They even had to make wood planking on the floor because the floor was not grounded enough that you wouldn't get electric shocks just from walking into the room. So now imagine it when it was sinking and those men were still in that room at 2:17 a.m. sending messages out, and the ship broke in half at 2:20. So you can imagine the state that room was in. And we know this for a fact because we know Harold opened up the spark gap before he left the room. He wound up surviving. But Phillips wound up staying in the room and did not survive. But we saw when James Cameron went down that the DC converter and the AC was switched all the way to the left, showing that he was trying at the last minute to get the very last power from Titanic to send out his last message. And here you see an example of that in the wreckage. That's the AC-DC converter, and that's in the wreck. You see that switch right there is pulled down, trying to make his last conversions. And you'll see that is all the way to the left. Here's some other fun examples of the silent room in the wreckage. It's in quite an interesting state considering what it went through. But you see some of the areas that match up. There's the turbine engines right there. You see the spark gap right there. That would spin around, creating a spark. The pneumatic tubing, which is still in situ in the wreckage, was made of brass. This would feed up to the purser's office on C deck, and that's what they would send messages as well as receive them from various passengers and to other ships. And you have one of the voltage meters. Okay, now that's a picture example of Phillips and Bride, again, who worked in the Marconi room. That there is the full picture of Father Brown's that he took. And that's a final full shot. And everything works in these rooms. Everything, all the switches move, and all the doors open. The buckets held sand. Yeah, and that could, I think it was used for grounding. And then this is just a fun little view into a piece that isn't here, but it's the Turkish baths that was on Titanic. And it's a piece I recently made. And that is almost in perfect condition on the ship. And those are all hand-laid tiles in 24 karat gold on the domes, which still exist in the wreckage as well. One of the rarities of this room that you see in the wreckage today is the furniture. Some of it is still there. It hasn't rotted away. And this is because that furniture is made of teak wood, which is incredibly resistant. All right, and that's a very quick run through basic Titanic. All right, thank you all for your time, and thank Antique Resources again very much for everything that you've done. And please feel free to ask questions. View the